Clara Bell came into the world unwanted, and she never let herself forget that. Raised by a gambling man and a mother who left before Clara could walk, she grew up learning how to read the room before she learned to read books. She carried a quiet, steady anger inside her that showed only in her eyes. That anger kept her back straight and her face clean in a town where girls her age were either tossed in someone's bed or out in the cold. Her father, Jeb Bell, never called her by name if he could help it, called her girl or useless if he was drinking, which he usually was. By the time she turned 18, Clara had figured out most of what the world thought of her kind. She was slim, with sharp cheekbones and gray eyes that didn't blink much. The girls in town called her spooky behind her back, like maybe she had so much blood in her. But the men, well, they watched her like hawks. Especially after she started helping her father run cards at the saloon. She'd sit at the edge of the table, mostly quiet, dealing hands and sweeping the pot when things got tense. She didn't wear anything fancy, just plain cotton and boots worn year through. But her stillness made folks look. And some men with hard mouths and soft eyes, started whispering to Jeb. It was the last Friday of May when Clara got dealt like a hand of poker. The saloon was packed that night, the air thick with smoke and sweat, the clink of whiskey glasses loud enough to drown a thought. Jeb had been losing all night, red-faced and sloppy. Clara stayed near the table, feeling the edge of something coming. She didn't know what yet, but her gut had started to hum, like it always did when things turned ugly. She was clearing chips when she heard it. "I'll raise you one daughter." The words cut through the noise. A few men laughed. Clara's spine locked tight. Her hands froze mid-sweep. The man across from Jeb was one she'd seen before. Elias Ward. Older, clean-shaven. The kind who wore city shoes and smelled like cologne instead of sweat. He looked like money, and he moved like someone who never got told no. "You heard me," he said again, tossing a fat pouch of gold onto the table. "You win, you take the pot. I win. She's mine for a year." Jeb didn't look at her, just stared at the pouch like it was a star dropped in his lap. His hand trembled as he reached for the cards. Claire didn't speak. She couldn't. Her voice had gone somewhere far away. She just stood there, heart thudding, watching her life get shuffled. He lost. Of course he did. That much gold didn't walk into a room unless the deck was marked. Clara knew it. Elias knew it. Hell, probably Jeb knew it too. But none of it mattered. She was sold. No tears came. Not even when Jeb stood up and left the saloon without looking back. Not even when Elias touched her elbow with a light hand, like they were courting. No, Clara just followed, quiet as ever, rage curled deep in her chest like a snake sleeping under warm stones. Elias didn't take her to a brothel. Not that night, anyway. He had a house on the edge of town, clean, well-kept, with fine rugs and glass windows. He gave her a room, told her to rest, said she could eat when she wanted, said he didn't believe in hurting women. But Clara knew better. She saw the tightness behind his smile, the way his jaw clicked when she didn't answer quick. She knew a man's heart didn't beat kind after buying a girl like a cow. He was just waiting. It wasn't long before she figured out what kind of waiting it was. He didn't touch her, not right away. Instead, he asked her questions. About Jeb. About who came through the saloon. About a drifter named Saul who used to pass cards under the table to the wrong man. Elias wrote things down in a little book. Told her he was building something. That soon, she'd be glad to have landed in his care. She started lying carefully, feeding him names that were already gone or dead. He didn't know. Not yet. He still trusted her face, still thought that quiet meant soft. It was during that second week that the stranger came to town. He didn't make a scene, didn't talk loud or wear shiny boots. Just came into the saloon one evening, looking dusty and plain, and sat in the back with his hat tipped low. Clara saw him before anyone else did. Something about the way he moved, slow and watchful, pricked at the back of her neck. Later that night, she caught him watching her. Not like the others. He wasn't leering or grinning, just looking like he was trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. Clara looked back. Didn't smile. Didn't blink. The next day, he showed up outside Elias's gate. Said his name was Micah. Said he was looking for work. Elias needed hands. What with the horses and fences? So he let him in. Paid him cheap. Watched him close. Clara watched him too. Micah didn't talk much. Worked hard. Ate slow. But he had a way of moving through the world like he'd already lost too much to care what people thought. His eyes were calm, but tired. He didn't ask her anything. Didn't try to save her, which is what made her notice. He just existed, steady and present, like a stone in a river. And for the first time in weeks, Clara felt something shift. Elias didn't like him. She could tell. He started getting sharper, more controlling, kept his book locked, started knocking on her door instead of waiting for her to come to the table. One morning, Clara found a knife missing from the kitchen. The next day, she found it under her pillow. No note, just the steel, cold and quiet like a promise. She didn't tell Elias. She didn't tell Micah. She just lay there that night, awake and breathing hard, staring at the ceiling. Because someone knew, and someone was going to fold. But not her. Not yet. Micah didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened, mostly because he spoke like someone who'd seen the inside of death and didn't care to be near it again. He kept to himself on Elias's property, feeding horses, fixing hinges, and sleeping in the old bunkhouse. Still, Clara noticed things, like how he always kept one boot half off when he napped, ready to move. How he sharpened his knife not for show, but because dull things got people killed. He was quiet, but there was violence under his skin, tucked away like a dog trained too long to bite only when asked. She didn't ask anything of him at first, just watched. But slowly, over shared glances and brief touches of silence, something unspoken began to bloom. It wasn't love, not yet. It was recognition. Of what? Neither of them could say. But Clara wasn't used to being seen like a person, and Micah wasn't used to anyone looking back. They didn't smile at each other. They didn't flirt, but they existed near each other like two animals who'd been hunted too long to run anymore. Then came Ruthie. She arrived on Elias's arm like she'd been born there, all curves and cherry lips, laughing like a bell and smoking imported cigars. Ruthie wasn't her real name. Clara figured that out after a few days. Too many different people in town seemed to know her from too many places and all with different names. But she was smart. Smarter than Elias, maybe. And she knew how to twist a room with just a glance. Ruthie said she was Elias's fiancée. Clara wasn't sure if that was true or just a word Ruthie liked using. The two didn't act like lovers. More like business partners. Dangerous ones who didn't quite trust each other. Elias watched her like a man who'd once been burned. Ruthie led him because she knew she had the fire. She took an interest in Clara almost immediately. "Pretty thing," she said one afternoon, brushing her fingers along Clara's shoulder like she was touching fine cloth. "Must be hell living out here with nothing but ghosts and horses." Clara didn't answer. She never did when she didn't know the angle. Ruthie smiled, all teeth. "You don't talk much." "Good. Makes men nervous. Gives you time to study him." That was the first thing Ruthie said that felt honest. The second came a few days later. "You know what Elias really does, don't you?" she asked, while painting her lips in the parlor mirror. "You think he just buys girls and watches them rot?" That's small time. Clara didn't answer, but she watched the way Ruthie's eyes flicked to the side to make sure they were alone. "He's moving something," Ruthie said quietly. "It ain't whiskey or cards." Clara's pulse jumped. She'd heard rumors. Gold smuggling, weapon caches, names written in ledgers that matched people who disappeared. But Elias had always been careful. Ruthie? She wasn't. "I could use someone like you," Ruthie said, eyes glinting. Someone people ignore. That was the first real offer Clara ever got. Not love, not protection, power. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. That same night, Micah knocked on her window. She wasn't surprised. She'd heard his steps before he reached the wall. She opened it quietly, heart hammering. He didn't climb through, just leaned in close enough that she could see the wear in his eyes. "I know what he did," Micah said. "To you." To others. I've seen it before. Man like him don't change. He just gets richer and meaner. Clara said nothing. I ain't here to play hero, Micah continued. But I'm not leaving either. Not till I know he can't do it again. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. Whatever Micah had been before, it was someone who'd lost too much to watch another girl get sold. So now Clara had 3 people circling her, and all of them had secrets. Elias, with his quiet empire and darker deals. Ruthie, who smiled like a queen but had snake blood in her veins. And Micah, whose silence said more than most men shouting. None of them told the full truth. Not even Micah. Especially not Ruthie. It wasn't long before Clara found out why. She followed Ruthie one night, after a long dinner where Elias had bragged too much and drank too little. Ruthie slipped from the back gate like a shadow, and Clara moved quick and silent after her. Down the ridge road, across the creek, to an old abandoned trapper's shed. Clara crouched behind a rock and watched. A man was waiting. She couldn't see his face, but the shape of him was wrong for this place. Too lean, too polished. Ruthie walked up like she'd done it before and handed him a stack of folded papers. Money changed hands. Then Ruthie kissed him. Not tender, not romantic, just control. Then she turned and walked back toward the house without a backward glance. Clara stayed hidden until the man disappeared, then returned to her room, head spinning. Ruthie wasn't just in on Elias's operation. She was playing him, selling information to someone else. Maybe the law, maybe something worse. By morning, Ruthie acted like nothing happened. Clara did too, because now she knew Ruthie wasn't just dangerous. She was unpredictable, and unpredictable people were harder to corner. Later that week, Elias took Micah with him on a ride to one of the outer barns. They were gone all day. When they came back, Elias's knuckles were scraped raw, and Micah had a bruise on his jaw. Neither said anything. That night, Elias drank more than usual, sat in his study with the door open and a gun on the table beside his ledger. Clara passed by once. He didn't look at her. The next day, she found a second knife under her mattress. This one wasn't from Micah. It had a thin red ribbon tied around the hilt. A message. But from whom? Was it Ruthie, marking her as an asset? Was it Elias, warning her that he knew she'd been watching? Or someone else entirely? The tension stretched across the ranch like barbed wire. No one trusted anyone, and yet no one dared act first. Clara moved through the days like someone playing a part in a play she didn't audition for, waiting for the scene to break open. Micah stayed near. He didn't speak of the bruise, but his eyes darkened whenever Elias was in the room. Clara started leaving little things for him. An extra piece of bread, a folded note with a drawn map of the property's blind spots. He understood. Didn't speak, just nodded once. Then the sheriff came. Not for Clara, not for Elias. Just a friendly visit, or so he said. But his questions lingered too long. His eyes caught on Ruthie more than once. He joked with Elias, but his mouth never smiled. Later, Ruthie cornered Clara in the garden. "That man's not here for the law," she whispered. "He's here for a payout. Same way all of them are." Clara tilted her head. "From who?" Ruthie's smirk was sad. "Does it matter?" And that was the truth, wasn't it? Everyone had a price. Elias's was gold. Ruthie's was power. The sheriff's was silence. Only Micah hadn't named his yet. So Clara asked him. They sat under the eaves during a dry thunderstorm, boots in the dirt, rain slanting past like silver knives. "What are you really here for?" she asked, voice low. Micah didn't answer right away, just looked out across the hills like something was buried there. "I had a sister," he said finally, "back east, sold to a man like Elias. Promised work, got something else. She sent letters, until she didn't." Clara's chest tightened. "I found the man," Micah said, "put a bullet in his spine. He didn't die right away." She watched him carefully. "You think Elias is the same?" she asked. "I know he is," Micah said, "but he's not the only one. He's just the next." So there it was. Micah wasn't here for Clara. He was here for blood. She just happened to be standing in the fire. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a pawn. She felt like a fuse, and someone was about to strike the match. It began with a garden. Not much of one, just a narrow patch of soil behind the bunkhouse, where the ground stayed soft from runoff and the sun caught it full in the morning. Clara started tending it on impulse, pulling weeds, turning dirt with her hands. She planted nothing, not at first. Just worked the soil over and over until her arms ached and her nails cracked. It wasn't about growing anything. It was about feeling something alive in her hands. After so many months of being moved like a piece on a board, the act of choosing to work that dirt felt like a rebellion. Micah noticed. He'd passed by without saying a word, but she saw the way his gaze lingered. One morning, she found a small tin of seeds on the step of the bunkhouse. Beans, squash, and something labeled simply wildflower. No note, no explanation. She didn't need one. That garden became their unspoken truce. He'd help dig rows. She'd bring water. They never said it aloud, but in those quiet hours side by side, something shifted. The air between them softened. She laughed once when he got startled by a snake and swore under his breath. It slipped out before she could stop it, light and breathy and unfamiliar. He looked up like he'd heard a bird that hadn't sung in years. He didn't laugh back, but he smiled. A real one. Small but honest. That was their first victory. A smile. The second came when Elias left for 3 days on business, taking 2 men and a cart headed toward Santa Fe. Ruthie stayed behind, fuming silently. Clara used the time to poke through the study. The safe was locked tight, but the drawers weren't. She found a map. Several, actually. Most were marked with small red X's. One was an old trail chart with a path circled and labeled in Elias's tight handwriting. June 18th, East Ridge, transport confirmed. She showed it to Micah late that night under the lantern light. He studied it, expression unreadable, then folded it carefully. They're moving something, he said. Could be weapons. Could be people. Could be both, she added. He didn't disagree. They made a plan, though neither of them called it that. Just a shared understanding. If they could intercept whatever Elias was moving, expose it or destroy it, they might finally break his hold. Maybe even draw outside attention, the kind Elias couldn't buy off. It felt good to do something. Clara felt herself breathing easier. The garden began to sprout. She woke before dawn, not from nightmares, but from habit. She began to hope. That was the problem with hope. It made the fall hurt worse. It started with Ruthie. She changed. Subtly. She stopped smiling so much. Started drinking more. She paced the halls like a cat in a burning house. Eyes darting, lips chewed raw. One morning, Clara caught her staring out the window at the bunkhouse with a look of deep worry. Not anger, worry. As if something had shifted in Ruthie's world, too. Later that day, Clara found Ruthie in the parlor with a letter in her hand. She tried to tuck it away, but Clara had already seen the seal. U.S. Marshal Service. You working with the law? Clara asked quietly. Ruthie didn't answer right away. She sat down, smoothed the letter flat on her skirt. Her hands trembled. Not working, she said. They're using me, same way Elias does. They promised a deal. Said if I helped them get proof, I'd walk. But they're not helping you anymore, Clara guessed. Ruthie shook her head. They want more. Names. Routes. Things I don't have. I'm just a pawn to them. Just like you. Clara stared at her. This woman, so composed, so sharp, it hadn't occurred to her that Ruthie was scared too. I wasn't supposed to care, Ruthie whispered. But then I saw what he did to you. What he does to all of us. And now I can't sleep. For a long moment, Clara didn't know what to say. Ruthie, the snake, the schemer. She was scared. Human. Not soft, but tired. Just like Clara. That was the second real connection. Not friendship, but honesty. And that was rarer. Ruthie folded the letter. You and Micah, she said, voice low. You trust him? I don't trust anyone, Clara said. But her voice cracked just slightly. Ruthie nodded. Then we're alike, you and me. But they weren't. Not really. Clara still had one thing Ruthie didn't. A future. The days rolled forward like boulders downhill. Elias returned. He brought new men with him, quiet ones with military haircuts and foreign accents. They didn't drink, didn't gamble. They just stood guard, watched everyone. Clara's skin crawled every time she passed them. One night, after dinner, Elias pulled Clara aside. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice smooth but sharp at the edges. "Not avoiding me, are you?" She shook her head. "You're part of something important now," he said, touching her wrist lightly. "Bigger than all of us. When the time comes, you'll understand." She said nothing, just nodded, heart pounding. That night she cried. Not loud, not long, but enough that Micah noticed when she passed him by moonlight, her cheeks still wet. He followed her down to the edge of the garden. "I can't pretend anymore," she whispered. "I'm scared." Micah didn't touch her. He didn't offer words. He just sat beside her in the dirt, knees pulled up, eyes on the stars. "I am too," he said. It was the simplest truth, the most powerful. Clara leaned into him, just barely. Her shoulder brushed his, and he didn't pull away. That was the third victory. Not a kiss, not a promise, just that touch, that permission to exist near someone without having to fight for the space. Then, days before the June 18th run, everything fell apart. One of the new men turned up dead, shot through the eye, left in the barn. The sheriff came, quiet and fast. Elias roared. Everyone was questioned. Micah last. Clara wasn't there when they took him to the study, but she heard the shouting. Later, she found him sitting on the porch, bruised again, lip bleeding. "He thinks I know more than I do," Micah said. "Maybe I do." "What does that mean?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I didn't kill that man," he said, "but I didn't mind that he's dead." That's when she saw it. The real thing he'd been hiding. Not vengeance. Not rage. Guilt. Micah had killed before. More than once. And some part of him believed he'd never stop. That he didn't deserve peace. "I'm not a good man, Clara," he said quietly. "I'm just the one who stayed behind." She wanted to tell him it wasn't true. That he was good. But she'd seen too much. She knew too well what the world made of good men. So instead, she said, "I don't care if you're good. I just care that you see me." He nodded slowly. "I do." That night, Ruthie came to her room. "I have a way out," she said. "A contact. He'll be waiting on the other side of the ridge, just before dawn on the 18th. But I can't go alone. You think I'll run?" Clara asked. "I think we won't survive if we stay." Clara stared at the window. The moonlight spilled across her floor. Her gut twisted. She didn't want to run. She wanted to end it. Burn it all down. But Ruthie was right. Staying meant bleeding. "I'll go," Clara said. But in her heart, she wasn't sure. The morning of the run came fast. The map was right. 2 wagons. Heavy crates. Armed riders. Elias rode out at the head, looking proud. The house empty behind him. Only 2 men left behind. Clara packed a small bag. Ruthie was already waiting, dressed in black, pistol at her side. But Clara paused by the bunkhouse. Micah wasn't there. She ran. To the barn. The garden. The ridge path. Nothing. Her chest burned with fear. Then she heard it, gunfire. Distant but sharp. The wagons had been ambushed. Micah hadn't run. He'd gone after Elias. She turned on her heel, bag dropping to the dirt. "Where are you going?" Ruthie called. "To finish it," Clara said and ran. Because love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's a flame that burns everything down to make something better grow. And Clara Bell had been planted deep in the dirt. Now she was blooming. She found him by the creek, bleeding into the mud. Micah was slumped against a tree, one hand clutching his side where a bullet had torn through flesh. His eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him, and for a second, he looked almost confused to see her. "I told you to run," he whispered. "I never said I would," she replied, pressing her hands against the wound. "You think I was going to let you get all the glory?" He laughed, then winced hard. His blood was warm, and it soaked fast through her fingers. She could feel the life slipping out of him, and the panic began to rise in her throat. "They're still out there," he said, eyes flicking toward the ridgeline. Elias, he's not dead. He ran when the marshals opened fire. Took the last crate with him. Something important. Then we find him, Clara said, voice steady even though everything inside her was screaming. But not without stopping the bleeding first. She dragged him to the edge of the creek, cleaned the wound with water that was too cold and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She tore her own dress to make bandages, tied them tight. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't, but he stayed conscious. He held her gaze and didn't let go. It was the first time she realized how badly she needed him to stay. But that wasn't the only problem. When they returned to the ranch hours later, everything had changed. The house was dark, the barn empty. Ruthie was gone. Inside the study, papers were scattered everywhere. Maps torn. The safe stood open. The ledger, Elias's ledger, was gone. The front door slammed behind them. A voice echoed through the parlor. Took you long enough. Clara spun, heart jumping in her throat. Ruthie stepped out from the shadows, revolver raised. I had to make a choice, she said, calm and flat. They offered me a full pardon. Money, too. If I gave them something they couldn't get on their own. Clara stared. You gave them us? I gave them Elias, Ruthie said. You were just attached to the bargain. Micah coughed behind her. Blood again. He was swaying. Ruthie, he's dying. And I'm not about to let you drag him off to safety before I get what I need. Clara took a step forward. You used me. No, Ruthie said softly. I believed in you. But belief doesn't keep people alive. Deals do. Clara lunged before she could think. Her hand knocked Ruthie's wrist. The gun went off, the sound splitting the air. A second later, they were on the ground, struggling. Ruthie clawed at her, teeth bared. Years of anger came flooding out of Clara. Years of being used, lied to, handed around like a goddamn token. When it was over, Clara was on top, holding the gun. Ruthie lay still beneath her. Not dead, but breathing hard, blood pooling where her head had hit the floor. Micah leaned in the doorway, pale as a ghost. We can't stay here, he whispered. Clara didn't answer. She just helped them walk. They didn't go far. The old trapper's cabin in the woods had been abandoned for years. Micah knew of it, said he'd stayed there once in the snow. It was small with a sagging roof and a rotting bed frame, but it was shelter. Clara cleaned his wounds again. This time he passed out. She thought he might not wake up. She sat by the fire all night, shotgun in her lap. In the morning, he opened his eyes. You stayed, he whispered. I wasn't about to fold, she said. Her voice cracked. That was the moment the storm broke inside her. She cried. For real this time. Gut deep. Ragged sobs that tore through her like a flood. Micah reached for her hand, and together they grieved. Not just for the past few days. For everything. For the little girl who got sold at 18 like a piece in a deck. For the quiet man who carried too many ghosts and didn't think he was worth saving. For the garden they never got to finish. They stayed there 3 days, nursing wounds, both old and new. On the 4th day, someone knocked. Not loud, just 2 soft raps. Clara raised the shotgun. Micah couldn't even sit up. She opened the door. It was Elias, but not the Elias she remembered. His coat was torn, his face cut and bruised. One arm hung limp. He didn't have a gun, just the ledger, held out in both hands like an offering. I'm done, he said. Clara didn't speak, just stared at him. You think you won? He said, stepping inside. You think you're the first to try. I don't care, she said, as long as you never touch anyone again. Elias smiled, slow and cruel. You think they'll believe you? You're a whore with dirt under her nails and a man bleeding on her floor. Clara didn't blink. She raised the shotgun and pointed it at his chest. You're not walking out of here, she said. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. Then shoot, he said. Go ahead. Finish it. Be the thing they said you were. She stared at him, then lowered the gun. No, she whispered. You don't get to make me into you. He laughed, but she didn't care, because she had the ledger and the truth. 2 days later, a deputy from Santa Fe found her in town. She handed over the ledger, gave a statement. Let them see Micah's wounds. Told him everything. Elias was arrested the next morning. The headlines used her name. Clara Bell exposes trafficking ring in New Mexico territory. The papers made her into something she wasn't. A hero, but she didn't feel like one. Not when Micah's fever came back. Not when he lay in bed whispering names of the dead in his sleep. Not when she found herself flinching at every loud noise. They moved north, quietly, took nothing but what they needed, bought a plot of land with the reward money, and started again. Micah built the fence with one arm still in a sling. Clara planted flowers. The pain didn't go away. Not fully. Not yet. But they were free. And that was enough. For now. The letter came in late spring, just as the wildflowers Clara had planted began pushing up through the soft earth. She found it tucked between the pages of an old catalog in town, handed to her with an unreadable look by the shopkeep. The envelope was thin, the handwriting familiar. Tight, sharp strokes. Ruthie's. She didn't open it right away. She walked back to their small cabin with it in her apron pocket, fingers twitching the whole time. Micah was splitting it out back, slower than usual but determined. His shoulder hadn't healed right. Some mornings he couldn't even lift his arm. Clara stood in the doorway, watching him, the unopened letter burning in her hand like it carried something alive. She waited until the sun dropped low and the frogs began to sing before she unfolded it. Inside were just a few lines. Elias is talking. Says he was never alone. Says you knew. Says you helped. You should be ready. They're looking to make an example out of someone. I won't protect you anymore. R. She read it twice. Then a third time. Micah came in, wiping sweat from his brow, and she didn't even look at him when she said, "He's trying to pin it on me." "What?" he asked, breath catching. "Elias," she said. "He's telling them I helped him, that I was part of the ring." Micah stared at her. He didn't speak. "I wasn't," she whispered, though her voice faltered. "I know," he said, and his voice didn't. But it didn't matter what he believed. It mattered what the law believed. A week later, they came. 3 men in suits. One was from the marshal's office. Another, some kind of government agent. The third never gave his name. Just stood behind the others, watching. Clara didn't run. She didn't beg. She gave them the statement again, same as before. She handed over every note, every letter, every scrap of Elias's handwriting she'd kept. They asked if she'd ever transported people, ever written ledgers, ever counted money. She said no. They didn't look convinced. They stayed 3 hours. Took her photograph. Micah sat on the porch, jaw tight, a rifle resting beside him. But he didn't say a word. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stepped out into the field where the garden ended and the grass began. The stars were bright, the sky clear. Everything felt too quiet. She thought of her first night with Elias. The white dress they made her wear. The men watching. The sick feeling in her stomach that she'd mistaken then for nerves. How young she'd been. How desperate to believe she had a choice. It all came back. The look in her mother's eyes when she signed the paper. The way the train felt when it left the station. Her stomach turning inside out as she realized what she'd been sold into. She had never said it out loud. Not to Micah. Not to anyone. Until that night. She found him sitting on the porch, blanket over his shoulders. He looked up at her, tired but present. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I'll let them take me," she whispered. "Not just Elias. The others. The men who paid. I stopped fighting. I smiled. I said thank you. Her voice broke. Micah stood, wincing, and crossed to her. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around her, held her so close she could feel his heartbeat against her ribs. "You survived," he said. "I don't feel like I did." He pulled back, looked her dead in the eye. "You're breathing. You're standing. You planted something in the dirt, and it grew. That's more than surviving, Clara." She cried again, but it wasn't the same kind of crying. It was the kind that came after a dam broke. Like her body had been holding it in for too long, and now it poured out of her in great, ugly sobs. He held her until the sun came up. That was the shift, the moment everything turned. Not because the pain ended, but because she let herself feel it. The next morning, she rode into town alone, walked straight into the post office and asked for paper, ink, and a ride to the courthouse in Santa Fe. She sat down in the corner booth of the cafe and wrote her story, every part of it. No disguises, no edits. She named the men. She listed the towns. She wrote about the garden, the shotgun, the cabin. And she signed it, Clara Bell. 3 weeks later, it was printed in full in the Santa Fe Ledger. A few called her brave. Most called her liar. But the investigation reopened. Elias was moved to federal custody. Ruthie disappeared. And Micah started sleeping through the night. For the first time in her life, Clara didn't hide when someone knocked on her door. She invited them in. She fed them coffee and bread. She told them what happened. Not for justice, not for revenge, but because it was the truth. And for the first time, she wasn't ashamed of it. One evening, as the summer stretched out and the heat came in waves through the windows, Micah sat beside her in the garden, hands in the dirt. "I had a brother," he said, quiet. Clara looked up, surprised. He'd never spoken about his past. "He died," he continued, "shot in front of me. I was 12. They called it an accident. It wasn't." She waited. "I told myself I'd never care about anyone that much again." "Did you keep that promise?" He met her eyes. "Until I met you." It wasn't a grand declaration. It didn't need to be. She leaned over and kissed his cheek, and they kept planting. They never built a fence high enough to keep the past out. They didn't try. They let it come. Faced it head on. And it passed. Not painlessly, but honestly. In the fall, the flowers died back. But the soil stayed rich. And Clara Bell, once passed around like a card at a table full of gamblers, sat on her porch beside the only man who never folded, and waited for spring. The first snow came quietly that year. It dusted the land in soft white, coating the fences, the garden, and the old cabin where Clara and Micah had made their new life. It wasn't the sharp, biting cold of years past, but a gentler kind of winter, one that seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to bloom beneath the frozen ground. Clara watched the flakes fall through the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Micah sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders, his other hand tracing patterns on the rough wood table. There was a calm between them now, a peace that had taken years to find and wasn't promised forever. But they had it, and that was enough. The garden, though buried beneath snow, still held the memory of growth. Every spring, Clara told herself it would return. The bulbs would push through the earth again, stubborn and bright, just like them. It was a promise she carried deep inside, that even after the darkest winters, life could begin again. Micah cleared his throat and looked at her, eyes warm. "I've been thinking." Clara smiled, curious. "We never planted a tree," he said. "Something that'll stand long after we're gone." She nodded, touched by the thought. "Then we should. Next spring, we'll pick the best spot." They spoke quietly about the future, not the wild dreams of youth, but the small, steady hopes of people who had weathered storms and learned to stand firm. A home, a family, healing. But healing wasn't easy. It was a slow work, like coaxing fragile shoots from frozen soil. Clara still flinched sometimes when a door slammed too hard, and Micah's hand sometimes trembled when he thought no one was watching. Yet with every shared meal, every whispered goodnight, every small act of kindness, the cracks began to close. One afternoon, as the snow softened to rain, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the old creek, the place where she'd first found Micah bleeding. She knelt, pressing her hand to the frozen earth, feeling the cold seep through her gloves. She thought about the pain, the fear, the helplessness she'd carried for so long. And then she pulled out a small wooden box from her coat pocket. Inside was a handful of wildflower seeds, the same kind they planted the year before. She scattered them across the bank, watching the grains disappear into the soil. "Here's to new beginnings," she whispered. Micah came up behind her and slipped his arms around her waist. Together, they stood there in the quiet, listening to the steady flow of the creek beneath the ice. Back at the cabin, They made room for hope in the corners of their lives. The worn quilt on the bed was replaced with a new one Micah had sewn, each stitch a small vow to keep moving forward. Clara planted herbs on the windowsill, their green shoots a reminder that life was stubborn and fierce. The past hadn't disappeared, nor had the scars, but they had learned to live alongside them, neither hiding nor surrendering. They found comfort in the ordinary, shared smiles over breakfast, the creak of the floorboards beneath their boots, the soft rustle of wind through the trees. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the snow, Clara held Micah's hand and said, "We're not just survivors anymore." "No," he agreed. "We're something better." And in that moment, under the quiet sky, they let go of the last pieces of fear and stepped forward together. The story wasn't over. It never really was. But for Clara and Micah, the chapter ahead was theirs to write.